Revenge with Karen.
I knew I was being erased when my badge still beeped green, but my calendar was blank, my inbox silent, and my name removed from the audit prep files like I'd died, and no one thought to notify HR. 8 years. That's how long I spent building the compliance system at Polaris Veritas, brick by digital brick. When I started, the entire department was a shared folder and a whiteboard scribbled with to-do in dry erase ink older than my nephew. I wrote the first policy manual at my kitchen table while reheating lasagna, cross-referencing SEC bulletins with my toddler screaming in the background. Back then, no one even said infrastructure without choking on their own sarcasm. Now, our compliance logs could withstand a Category 5 audit, or so I thought. Greg Lorne arrived wearing ego like it was tailored. VP of Operations, allegedly. I knew the type. Shiny resume from a firm that thought HIPAA was a yoga pose, smug grin that mistook silence for consent. His welcome speech was basically a text on how we all needed to think faster, move leaner, cut bloat. Translation? I don't understand your job, and that makes me uncomfortable. He shook my hand like it owed him money, called my department process heavy, said he wanted to streamline compliance touchpoints. I wanted to ask if he also streamlined smoke detectors or condoms, things that only seem excessive until something goes catastrophically wrong. Instead, I smiled, said, "Nice to meet you, Greg," and that was my first mistake, assuming niceties mattered. Quick break in the madness if you're the kind of person who listens to stories like this and doesn't hit subscribe or like, just know, 93% of listeners don't. Be the weird, beautiful anomaly that does. Keeps our little storytelling engine alive. Thanks for being the rare one. Anyway, back to the autopsy of my professional execution. Greg's first target was my team. Realignments, he called them. Reassignments, attrition nudges, and one poor soul who went on special project rotation and was never seen again. He gutted our workflow checklists and replaced them with a Confluence board that looked like it was designed by a caffeinated squirrel. And I raised concerns like, say, the buyer's legal team expecting a signed audit trail and not a Miro board filled with emoji thumbs up. Greg patted my arm and said, "Catherine, we're not building a compliance museum." Ah, there it was. The insult disguised as vision. I didn't argue. I've been through shakeups before, directors who think policies are vibes, COOs who confuse documentation with bureaucracy. All eventually learn the same thing. When the house catches fire, it's not the architect you need, it's the one who memorized the fire code. I started printing things, saving emails, backing up access logs, not because I plan to weaponize them, but because I know how this story goes. When the walls crack, people start pointing fingers at the foundation. The whispers started a few weeks out from the acquisition review. A buyer, big fish, serious money. $250 million on the table. Greg strutted through the halls like he'd already bought the yacht. But I noticed the gaps: security logs marked as pending, version controls overwritten with clean drafts, policy sign-offs done post-dated and backfilled. That's not modernization. That's malpractice. Still, I stayed quiet. Until the day I opened the weekly prep packet and found no mention of my name. No invites, no assignments, nothing. Just a line item that said compliance liaison, TBD. That's when I knew they weren't just sidelining me. They were betting the whole deal I'd stay silent. They forgot I don't raise my voice. I document. First came the Thursday layoffs, masked as realignment notices but landed like silent funerals. My team shrank overnight. Heather, who had built the version control matrix from scratch, was invited to pursue growth opportunities. Marcus, once caught a duplicate data trail before the buyer's audit even started, was shifted to facilities to bring his system's mindset to space planning. It took everything I had not to laugh during that meeting. Space planning. The man couldn't keep a succulent alive in his cubicle. I asked Greg, point blank, "What's the logic here?" He smiled the way snakes probably smile in their dreams. "Lean is the new safe," he said. "We need to simplify, eliminate oversight." He chuckled like I'd told a dad joke. "Catherine, the buyers don't want to see 800-page audit trails and 20 initials per form. They want agility. We're not building a compliance museum." That line again. He said it like he'd trademarked it. Maybe he practiced it in front of his mirror every morning between crunches and whatever protein powder he mainlined. I'd heard worse in boardrooms, rarely with that much confidence from someone who didn't even know how to spell SOX compliance without spell check. And the worst part, People nodded. Our CTO, a guy who once lectured me on the necessity of immutable logs, was suddenly quoting agile frameworks like they were scripture. Someone in HR started putting hashtags in internal memos. Hash culture shift. Hash audit light. I'm not kidding. By the end of that week, the checklist repository I'd curated for 8 years, including every version-approved template with embedded protocol timelines, was sunset. No backup. Just gone. Replaced by a Slack thread and a Notion doc that had more animated GIFs than actual policy. I didn't argue. I bought a second printer. I started printing everything. Access logs, email headers, version deltas, even Greg's idiotic Slack posts with fire emojis and phrases like "let's make compliance sexy." If you're wondering how to kill the morale of a room full of exhausted auditors, that's the phrase, that's the bullet. What stung the most wasn't the insult to my work. It was the erasure of method. Good compliance isn't flashy. It's not in your face. It hums quietly beneath the noise, like a generator you forgot was running, until someone unplugs it and the whole building goes dark. Wanted streamlined? They'd get it, like a diet with no nutrients. Pretty on the surface, dead behind the eyes. I watched from the sidelines as Greg began hosting integration readiness meetings with all the subtlety of a startup salesman hopped up on espresso. I wasn't invited. I wasn't even copied on the notes. But I got the drift, fast-tracking, loosening internal review controls, delegating policy sign-offs to staffers who thought at a station was a type of wine. Once I bumped into him in the hallway and asked about a critical missing at a station for our encryption vendor. He waved me off like I'd asked where he left his gym bag. "That's vendor ops now," he said. "If it matters, they'll surface it. If it matters," I wanted to scream. Encryption compliance was the first item on the buyer's pre-audit checklist, but Greg was already walking away, tapping on his phone, muttering something about low-value noise. So I pivoted. I stopped warning them. I documented instead. I exported Slack logs. I screen-captured calendar invites where compliance sign-offs were listed as verbal aux. I flagged every interim policy Greg's new hires dropped into the system without revision history. There were 16 by the end of the month. 16, all of them unsigned, unvetted, and loaded with risk language like at manager discretion. But nobody cared, yet. I became a ghost in my own department. Didn't fire me, didn't demote me. Just made me irrelevant. Greg thought that was safer. If he pushed too hard, maybe I'd sue. But if he just buried me under silence and corporate cheerleading, I'd go away quietly. He forgot who built the damn shovel. I knew it was coming the second my laptop froze mid-email. The screen blinked, the compliance dashboard logged me out, and when I tried to re-enter with my admin credentials I'd had for 8 years, got a cheery little red message. Permission denied. Please contact your administrator. Except I was the administrator, or had been. I refreshed twice, then opened Outlook to ping IT. My calendar was empty, not just cleared, deleted. Standing meetings, audit syncs, review walkthroughs, even my recurring one-on-one with legal, all gone like they'd never existed. Like I'd never existed. And that's when the pit in my stomach dropped to the floor like a lead weight. It wasn't a glitch. It was a burial. 15 minutes later, HR called me, not even my usual rep, just some poor new hire reading off a script like she was about to offer me an extended car warranty. "Hi, Catherine. This is Amber from Employee Relations. Due to ongoing departmental realignments, leadership has requested that you transition to remote duties, effective immediately." Remote duties. For a role that required in-person access to secured files, physical audit logs, internal review walkthroughs, and classified buyer prep materials. "Define remote duties," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Amber stammered, papers rustling. You'll be on call for document clarification if needed. Please refrain from accessing any shared folders while realignment is underway. Refrain from accessing the files I built during the most critical acquisition audit in company history." I didn't argue, didn't ask for clarification. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the blinking cursor on my now worthless laptop screen. Then I got to work. If Greg wanted me out of the picture, fine. But I wasn't going to vanish quietly. I'd spent nearly a decade embedding myself in every single policy thread, revision log, and compliance review process at Polaris Veritas. I had muscle memory for where the skeletons were buried, because I'd tagged them. That night, I pulled an old external hard drive from my filing cabinet. It still had the original backup of our compliance archive from the pre-cloud days, when I used to double encrypt everything and manually log my data just in case someone accidentally wiped a shared folder. I plugged it in and smiled. Greg may have nuked the new system, but he hadn't scrubbed the past. I started compiling. Audit trail inconsistencies. Replaced sign-off chains. Revoked credentials without documented transfer of responsibility. And the crown jewel? A master access log from 3 weeks prior, showing Greg logging into the restricted compliance vault with temporary elevated privileges, downloading 3 flagged documents, and leaving no audit comment. The system flagged it internally, of course, but he had since disabled automated escalation alerts. I had screen captures, timestamps, even the change request ticket where he'd approved his own access, digitally initialed GL. In a company like Polaris Veritas, that wasn't just shady. That was enough to raise flags for intentional obfuscation, especially with a $250 million buyer breathing down our necks. I also printed a hard copy of my own timeline. Each time I raised a concern, who I emailed, which document I referenced, and what I was told. My last note to Greg, flagging an undocumented vendor integration, had been marked not a priority. It later showed up in the prep packet with a fake policy sign-off. That went in the archive, too. I wasn't angry, not in the traditional sense. Anger implies fire. I felt something colder, calculated. I wasn't going to torch the building. I was going to catalog its collapse. Greg wanted a scapegoat in case his house of cards fell. He thought by erasing my presence was erasing the risk. But risk doesn't disappear when you shut your eyes. And I was wide awake. It happened at 9:03 a.m. on a Wednesday, the kind of timestamp you don't forget because it feels like the universe whispering, now pay attention. I was in sweatpants, halfway through burning my oatmeal when my phone buzzed. Hey, Catherine, do you know where the master compliance matrix lives now? Greg said it was migrated, but I can't find it in the new system. Need it for the doc prep checklist. Urgently, it was from Dylan, young, bright, well-meaning, and woefully under-equipped for the circus he just wandered into. He was the type who used to ask real questions during meetings, before Greg turned every discussion into a performance review. I stared at his message for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard. I could have sent it to him, could have attached the matrix, walked him through the flags, even saved his ass from the black hole he was now orbiting. But I didn't. Instead, I turned my phone face down and let the oatmeal boil dry. By 10:30, I was downtown, walking into a cafe that pretends to be rustic, but charges extra for oat milk. The man waiting for me was already seated, no blazer, no laptop, just a leather-bound notepad and a pen he hadn't uncapped yet. Catherine, he said, standing. Thanks for agreeing to this. I was curious, replied, sitting across from him. You're not listed on the official prep team. He gave a tight smile. I'm not. But let's just say I work with the buyer's legal division. Quietly. His name was Marcus Wu, though he didn't say it until we were halfway through our iced Americanos. He was careful, composed, the kind of man who knows how many syllables to give a sentence to make it sound like neither threat nor flattery. We made small talk for a few minutes, background, experience, what it's like being transitioned by someone who thinks the Constitution is a Google Doc. Then he leaned in. I'll be blunt, Marcus said. We've noticed inconsistencies. Policy versioning, missing timestamps, broken audit trails. On paper, Polaris Veritas looks like a company that outsourced its ethics to Canva. Internally, we're trying to determine whether this is incompetence or willful negligence. And your name keeps coming up. I'm sure it does, I said, sipping. The only one who didn't pretend compliance was optional. He didn't laugh, but I saw the flicker of agreement. Off record, is there anything you want us to know? That's when I pulled the flash drive from my bag. A cheap black one, no logos, no markings, except for a piece of masking tape, hand-labeled in red Sharpie, version control, 3-year record. I set it on the table like a loaded pistol and said, you'll find more than inconsistencies. He didn't touch it immediately. Smart man, what exactly are we looking at? Full compliance history. Internal flags, overwritten approvals, revoked sign-offs, vendor policy drift, altered encryption audits, and a complete log of which protocols were discarded without mitigation. Everything up to a week ago, before my access was revoked. He blinked once, slow. Is this admissible? It's metadata, not interpretation, I said. If you need interpretation, I've annotated the inconsistencies, timeline included. I also highlighted the gaps Greg engineered quietly but clearly. You'll see the escalation paths he interrupted. Marcus finally reached for the drive, but he didn't pocket it. Just held it, weighing it like it had a pulse. Catherine, you understand what you're doing here? Yes, I said. I'm not blowing whistles. I'm handing you the sheet music Greg shredded. He nodded slowly. Would you be willing to speak with our internal counsel off-site? Not until after the review fails, I said, finishing my coffee. Then you'll know I'm not just bitter, I'm accurate. He gave a faint smile, almost respectful. We'll be in touch. As I walked back into the sunlight, I felt nothing. No thrill, no righteousness. Just a cold, clean silence where the panic used to be. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to save anyone. I had simply become the insurance policy they didn't know they needed, till they realized what it cost to exclude me. By the morning before the audit, the building buzzed like a Vegas slot machine right before it hits all sevens, except instead of jackpots, everyone was bracing for detonation. The halls were suddenly quieter. HR stopped chirping out motivational quotes. Even the espresso machine in the break room sounded nervous. People weren't talking in meetings anymore. They were talking in whispers, behind closed doors, Slack-side threads that started with "delete this after reading." Because the rumor had finally escaped the executive aquarium and started circling open waters. The buyers weren't sending a prep team. They were sending the audit team. No PR fluff, no glossy liaisons. These were the sharks from the buyer's compliance division, the ones known for catching acquisition fraud 3 layers deep in a metadata export. And worse, they weren't coming to help. They were coming to verify. Story spread like a fire in dry brush. Someone at legal's assistant said the lead auditor once canceled a $400M deal mid-lunch because a timestamp didn't line up with a sign-off. Someone in ops claimed they saw Greg pacing his office muttering, "We're good, we're good, we're good," like a nervous mantra. And someone, God bless their gossipy soul, asked in a group thread if I'd be consulting for the audit. The thread was deleted in under 60 seconds. It was too late. My name was now radioactive, not because I was involved, but because I wasn't, because I had been erased, and now people were wondering why. That same morning, I bumped into Dylan again. His face looked pale enough to sell insurance. He opened his mouth like he wanted to ask me something, maybe where a protocol doc lived, maybe whether Greg had authorized the shredded logs, but then shut it. Just gave a faint, exhausted smile and walked away. I didn't stop him. Instead, I opened my phone, scrolled past the buyer's counsel contact, and tapped a different number, my salon. "Hey Maria," I said. "You free tomorrow around 10? She laughed. "You want your usual stress cut or the burn it all down and bleach it treatment? Let's split the difference. Just enough polish to say I'm not surprised, just prepared." She whistled. "Oh, it's that kind of day." The appointment was set. I hung up and stared out the window at the skyline, clean, orderly, full of glass and steel, pretending it didn't creak behind the surface. It reminded me of Greg's internal memo that leaked the night before. A culture assurance briefing to all staff, loaded with phrases like audit-ready posture, streamlined integration, and championing full transparency. My favorite part, the section titled Legacy Processes and Evolution. He claimed compliance restructuring had allowed greater trust and flexibility across functions. Trust and flexibility. That's rich, considering the internal server logs were now a spaghetti bowl of mismatched approvals and retroactive access. And functionally, they were still missing 2 years of layered audit trails because Greg thought process debt was just a scary phrase old-timers like me used to hold on to power. But nobody was laughing anymore. Whispers kept spreading. I got 3 LinkedIn requests that day, all from current employees. One of them even messaged, "Just so you know, some of us remember who built the floor we're standing on." I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I opened the archive folder on my external drive and gave it one last scan. Color-coded, indexed, cross-referenced. If you opened the master file, it didn't just tell a story, it proved one. A very expensive one. I knew tomorrow wouldn't be explosive. That's not how these things work. It would be surgical. Quiet. Questions asked with clipped syllables and paused pens. Long silences that would feel like thunder. And when the audit team finally asked the fatal question, "Where's your compliance lead?" Greg would smile his smuggest until the silence turned back on him like a mirror. And I'd be mid-hair rinse with a coffee in one hand and peace in the other. Don't need to be in the room when the walls fall. You just need to have built the blueprints they ignored. The audit started at exactly 9 a.m. with the kind of clinical precision that sends executives reaching for their urgent calls and C-suite deodorant. Greg strutted in 5 minutes early, holding a clipboard like it contained divine truth. Behind him, the rest of the team filed in, sales, ops, vendor management, each looking like they had just studied for a test they'd never seen the syllabus for. The lead auditor? A woman named Evelyn Kravitz, mid-50s, hair in a no-nonsense bun, glasses she only wore when she wanted to watch someone squirm. She didn't shake hands, didn't smile, just nodded, opened a binder the size of a microwave and said, "Let's begin with policy lineage and version integrity." And just like that, the meat grinder began turning. Started with encryption policy 7A. The document was produced quickly, kudos to Greg's assistant, who had clearly been told to keep everything pretty. And it was. Too pretty, white space everywhere, minimal annotations, no revision log. Evelyn glanced at it, flipped to the back, and tapped with a pen. "This references policy 6.4 as the basis for key rotation schedule," she said. Greg smiled. "Correct. That's a legacy policy we've streamlined." "Please produce policy 6.4, she interrupted. Greg blinked. "It's no longer in circulation. That's why we transitioned." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "So this policy references another that doesn't exist?" "Well, it existed. We've moved to a leaner framework. I'm not auditing theory, Mr. Lorne. I'm auditing record integrity. Produce policy 6.4. Silence. A few shuffled papers. Greg whispered something to Dylan, opened a laptop, and began typing like he was defusing a bomb. Across the room, legal started sweating. Literally. I could almost feel it from my perch 3 blocks away, where I sat with foils in my hair and a latte steaming on the salon counter. Back in that room, Evelyn kept going. "Let's review version history logs for that encryption protocol," she said. What followed was a slow-motion dismemberment. Timestamps didn't align. Version 2.2 of the policy had a date 3 days after the sign-off recorded in the review checklist. And that checklist, it was signed by someone who'd been reassigned a week earlier. Then came the access logs. The system trail showed multiple policy files accessed with elevated privileges from Greg's admin account. The problem? There was no documented change request, no approval chain. Just a raw access spike with 0 contextual metadata. "That's probably a mirrored credential," Greg offered weakly. "From your own account?" Evelyn asked deadpan. He didn't answer. Around this time, someone from Ops asked to step out for a quick call. Another asked if the room could be ventilated. The mood wasn't tense, it was falling apart. There's a distinct sound when a room full of professionals realizes the iceberg isn't ahead, it's already under them. And then came the moment. Evelyn looked up, not at Greg, but at the table as a whole. Calm, controlled. "Can we speak with your compliance lead?" You could have heard a mouse blink. Greg's mouth opened, but no sound came out. One of the junior analysts glanced at legal like a kid caught stealing. Finally, Dylan, poor, panicked Dylan, said the words out loud. "She's not here." Evelyn didn't flinch. She simply closed the folder slowly, like a judge sealing a verdict, and said, "That explains it." She didn't need to raise her voice. Silence that followed said everything. At that exact moment, my stylist Maria asked, "You want the layers feathered or blunt?" I smiled into the mirror. "Blunt," I said. "Definitely blunt. Because there's a kind of satisfaction that doesn't come from screaming or suing or even surviving. It comes from knowing you told the truth, documented the fallout, and watched the house collapse exactly as you warned it would, while everyone else was too busy redecorating the walls. There are silences that sting, and then there are silences that haunt. The kind that linger in rooms long after people leave them. The kind that makes drywall feel like it's collapsing inward. That's what settled into the Polaris Veritas conference room at precisely 10:47 a.m. Just after Evelyn Kravitz, lead auditor of the $250 million acquisition deal, asked her now famous question. "Can we speak with your compliance lead?" Greg Lorne blinked once, then again like he was trying to reboot his brain through sheer will. His jaw tensed, lips parted as if a clever lie was loading, but the network signal wasn't strong enough. His fingers shuffled papers that no longer mattered. PowerPoint decks, revised org charts, fake timelines, corporate fiction written in pastel slide transitions. It was Dylan, sweet, panic-ridden Dylan, who cracked first. She was removed last week," he said, voice barely audible, but the kind that cuts through bone when the stakes are high enough. Removed. Not resigned. Not transferred. Removed. Evelyn let the words settle. Then, with the theatrical stillness of a surgeon placing down a scalpel, she closed her binder, pressed her hands flat against the table, and delivered the quietest guillotine in the history of boardroom diplomacy. "Gentlemen," she said, "it's not just data that's missing, it's competence." No one spoke. Not Greg. Not legal. not the project lead who had been giving LinkedIn TED-lite lectures on audit agility. Even the intern taking minutes stopped typing, hands frozen above the keyboard like she'd touched a live wire. There was no protest, no defense, just the sound of 24 people collectively realizing they'd handed a live grenade to a man who thought the pin was a keychain. Across the city, 3 blocks away, I took another sip of my cappuccino. Cafe was calm, sunlight slicing through the windows, the milk in my cup swirled just right. Maria had done a fantastic job, blunt layers, clean lines. I looked composed, like someone who didn't need to be in the room anymore because the room had finally remembered who used to hold the blueprints. My phone buzzed. Not a text, a call. I looked at the screen. Marcus Wu. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Catherine speaking. Miss Avery, Marcus said. Way smoother than usual, we'd like to talk again. Before or after the fallout report gets rewritten? He chuckled, not unkindly. Ideally before. The buyer's team has some new considerations. I bet they do, I said, leaning back in my chair. We're hoping you're available this afternoon. Discreet location, same as last time. Nothing formal yet, understood. Also, he added, his tone shifting into something steelier, we've read the flash drive. The annotations. The timeline. It's thorough, I smiled. I don't believe in half measures. No, he said. I see that now. We agreed on a time. I hung up. My reflection in the window looked calm. Dignified, prepared. Back at Polaris Veritas, Greg was likely mid-spiral. I imagined him pacing, issuing frantic calls to IT, demanding to know who had access to what, whether any of this could be blamed on a rogue update or unintentional procedural drift. But it didn't matter anymore, because the one person who could have explained everything, the one who built the framework, trained the team, and flagged the failures before they became lawsuits, wasn't there. And that silence? It wasn't an absence. It was an indictment. By noon, the word emergency was being thrown around Polaris Veritas like confetti at a doomed wedding. Board members were summoned mid-flight, lawyers were pulled from closed-door calls, and someone even rebooted the executive war room, place that hadn't seen daylight since the last failed merger attempt 5 years ago. The buyer's team had gone dark. Total radio silence. For any acquisition, that's the death knell. You want buyers asking questions, probing gaps, submitting red lines. What you don't want is the sound of lawyers not calling back. That means they're not negotiating, they're documenting, preparing exits, or worse, lawsuits, or assembled behind frosted glass in a room full of necks craning toward Greg like he was the last can of soup before a hurricane. And then came the blow. Not from the buyer, from inside. A board liaison entered the war room with a flash drive in one hand and a printout in the other. This was submitted yesterday, she said, placing both on the table. To the buyer's legal review. Greg leaned forward, trying to mask his nerves. Submitted by who? The liaison didn't answer. She didn't need to. The masking tape on the flash drive said it all. Version control, 3-year record Catherine Avery's handwriting. Unmistakable, neat, surgical. The printout was the index. 8 pages, cross-referenced annotations, color-coded categories, and worst of all, approvals, digital initials, audit stamps, signature logs. Greg's name was on nearly all of them. Every protocol override, every skipped revision, every unsigned checklist marked as streamlined, every time he accessed files outside of documented change requests, every time he approved something interim without sending it through risk review. At one point, someone asked quietly, "Did you even read the compliance framework?" Greg snapped. It was outdated, bloated. We had to modernize. And instead, a board member muttered, flipping through the index, "You turned it into a liability." Eagle confirmed what everyone feared. Catherine's file had been submitted before the audit started. That meant the buyers already knew. The audit wasn't discovery, it was confirmation. One of the external advisors leaned back and said, they're building a case, either to walk away clean or renegotiate with clawbacks. Someone suggested calling Catherine. A hand went to the phone. The board's assistant stepped out to make the call. Catherine didn't answer. I was at home by then, in soft clothes, sipping tea out of my favorite chipped mug. The kind of calm you only earn after surviving a hurricane that you predicted, but no one else bothered to board up for. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown internal number. I watched it ring, then pressed decline. Let them sweat. Let them remember the dozens of times I warned them in board meetings, in emails, in margin notes written in red ink and underlined twice. Let them reread the line I added to the cover letter on the flash drive. You may remove a name from a calendar, but not from a system's DNA. Greg, meanwhile, was unraveling. Someone told me later that he accused the audit team of having a vendetta, tried to spin the documentation as retrospective bias, even tried to claim the files were fabricated, until legal confirmed the metadata showed clean, unaltered timestamps going back 3 years. Board didn't even raise their voices. They just let the weight of the evidence do the crushing. At one point, a director asked, "If you're not the architect of this collapse, why is your signature on every beam?" Greg didn't answer. He just stared at the folder like it was a live wire, already humming with the end of his career. And I started a new document that afternoon, titled it "When They Call Back." Subhead, Terms of Re-Entry, because I knew what was coming. I wasn't planning on settling for silence. They didn't call it an apology, because men like Greg don't write those, and boards don't officially admit they screwed up unless someone's name ends up on an SEC filing. But the message was loud enough. The acquisition wasn't dead, just under renegotiation, and the buyer's first term, not a payout, not a clawback, me. Specifically, condition of re-engagement. Catherine Avery to return as Vice President of Compliance and Governance, with full autonomy, reporting directly to the board. No dotted lines, no bureaucratic games, no Greg. At first, the board hesitated. One director had the gall to say, "But will she even want to come back?" Legal cleared his throat and said, "She already has the buyer's trust. The question isn't if she'll return, it's whether we deserve her back." Greg didn't attend that meeting. He'd already been placed on leave pending investigation. HR spun it as noncompliance with oversight protocols, but internally, the phrase gross misconduct and negligence circulated like wildfire. There was no ceremony, no farewell cake. One day his nameplate vanished from the executive floor, and someone from facilities was seen dragging out an ergonomic chair and a desk lamp that still had the price tag on it. Org chart was rewritten that week. Not just updated, rewritten. I received my offer in a plain manila envelope, hand-delivered, no fanfare. The salary was generous, the authority unambiguous, and the final clause was hand-signed by the board chair. You will have full access and oversight to reinstate integrity throughout the audit and post-merger transition. The same day I returned, the new directory outside the elevator had my name etched in the steel panel. Catherine Avery, VP Compliance and Governance. Fresh, precise, permanent. I walked into the lobby wearing the same heels they once teased me for, low, practical, unremarkable. The same ones I wore the day I helped write the company's original policy index. The badge reader turned green. My access had been restored overnight. Funny how fast the system remembers you when the people finally do. I passed the reception desk. The new assistant, used to pretend not to know who I was, even while scanning my clearance level every morning, rose awkwardly and smiled too hard. "Welcome back, Miss Avery. Can I get you anything?" I paused, looked around the glass lobby. Same fake ferns, same recycled air, but everything felt different. Not because I was back, but because I didn't need to be. I chose to return. "I'll need a secure room," I said, voice calm but surgical, and a whiteboard. She blinked. "For what?" "For reconstruction," I said. "We're building something that doesn't collapse when someone forgets where the beams are." Then I walked past her, not looking back. There were no victory banners, no standing ovation, just the quiet hum of a system that now knew its own fragility, and the woman who once whispered warnings in red ink was now holding the pen again. This wasn't revenge. This was authorship restored, not louder, just undeniable. I had been dismissed, archived, doubted, silenced, but I documented. Then I was consulted, feared, reinstated, and now I redefine the damn blueprint. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.